We're going to talk tonight about the problem of immaturity. This is some of the strangest times that I've ever faced in my life. I've never seen so much happen so quickly, from grocery stores to health care to, just right across the board. It just makes you sit back and shake your head, wow. And people have tried to blame it on the Democrats, and they've tried to blame it on, other things, but it is what it is. But, when you think about the first century church, when they started meeting, if they were caught worshiping God, some of them lost their lives for it. Some of them were kicked out, or they were kicked out of the synagogue. They were shunned by their family members, but yet they still came together and worshiped God. So, and I'm not saying, that for any other reason than, we take for granted every day some of the simple things, like being able to go to the store and find a loaf of bread or find some toilet paper or, whatever. And now it's like, it's crazy. So after this is all over, hopefully, if anything we can learn out of that, we can be more thankful for what we have. In 1 Corinthians chapter 13 and verse 1, this scripture is talking about spiritual gifts and how when that which is perfect was done away with, or that which was imperfect was done away with, and that which is perfect came, we'd put away our childish things. And it says, when I was a child, I spake as a child, I understood as a child, I thought as a child, but when I became a man, I put away childish things. Let's look at Ephesians chapter 4 real quick. Ephesians chapter 4 and starting in verse 11. And he gave some to be apostles, prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds, the teachers, to equip the saints for the working of the ministry, for the building up of the body, until we attain to the unity of the faith and the knowledge of the Son of God, to mature manhood, to measure the stature of the fullness of Christ, so that we are no longer to be children, tossed to and fro by the waves and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by human cunningness, by craftiness and deceitful schemes. So, it's our God-given duty that we grow up and that we become Christians, that we no longer resort to childish ways and immaturity. Christianity is too big and too great to be defiled by the pettiness of a Banty Rooster personality. When we're housed in these bodies, it's proper for children to act like children, but it's improper for people who are grown in body to remain children in disposition. This isn't good. Adults should behave as adults. This doesn't come sometime without some kind of effort to make sure that we're acting like grown men and women. When I think back to my life, I grew up and lacked self-confidence. I lacked interpersonal skills. You probably wouldn't have recognized me back then. I wouldn't look at you and I wouldn't speak to you. And if you talked to me, I may say a word or two. And I had some men in my life that pushed me and encouraged me to go on and to stand up and to talk to people. And my number one priority at even a young age was to get married and get out of the house. I didn't consider going to college. I didn't consider, anything else. I just wanted to get out of the house and get out from under the roof of my father and, you start my own life. Well, I made one real good choice, and she's still with me. So, that turned out good. But I was forced to grow up in a hurry. And, sometimes we as Christians, we may be forced to have to grow up. What are some of the childish traits, though, that we should retain? There's some of the characteristics of childhood we should cherish and hold fast to and keep all of our lives, but there's others that we need to outgrow quickly. However, unless we're watchful and desirous of this more beautiful life of maturity, we can lose the good and keep the bad. Here are some of the childhood traits that should be ours forever. First is simple faith and trust. If you look at little children, they have a tendency to believe people what they tell them, and they trust in them to the fullest. I can remember we got an above ground pool, and Paisley was learning how to swim, and she'd get up on the ladder, and I'd step back and go, "All right, baby, jump to me." She wouldn't think nothing. She'd bail off and just, come up, and she just hugged my neck. She trusted me. She trusted in what I said. And Lakeland, on the other hand, when I was teaching her to ride a horse, Lakeland is a very quiet, she loves animals, and when she was dealing with this pony, he was a little bit hard-headed, and I would say, "Get on him." "I can't do that, Bob, I can't." So, she would not go into doing that. So it just kind of stuck out in my mind. There was another story about a father and a son, and they were on a wagon, and the wagon ran away with them. And if you know anything about horses, you have far more control if you're on their back with a bridle and reins than you do if you're back here in a buggy. I mean, especially if you got a team of horses. And so this buggy was running away out of control, and the man's eyes were big and huge, and he was scared. And when they finally got everything under the control, they asked the little boy, said, "Are you all right?" He said, "Yeah, I wasn't afraid because my daddy was with me." Trusting his father's love and the power drove out all of his fear. This is the kind of trust that we need to have in our Heavenly Father, that He'll protect us from all fright. "I will trust and not be afraid," Isaiah 12:2. One of the greatest verses to go to look at where we can draw our strength, I think, is Proverbs chapter 3, verse 56. "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all of thy ways acknowledge Him, and He shall direct your path." I think sometimes we trust sometimes, but do we trust all the time in the Lord? Do we turn it over to Him? And even sometimes I've had people ask me, "How do I know that God answers my prayers?" Well, does God always answer our prayers? Yes, He does. And He can say, maybe not verbally, but the answer could be yes, no, or not right now, or, you're not ready for that, or whatever. But God works providentially through us. And sometimes, I can remember praying about a job, or should I do it or not. Well, if I stay here, God can use me, or if I go here, God can use me. The fact is that God uses, to deliver His message and to do the right thing. So, if you're expecting to hear that small, still voice in your ear that God answers you, I'm afraid you're going to be, waiting for a long time. But children are, in the sympathy part, children are very compassionate and tender-hearted. They're easily touched by the suffering of living creatures. And you've seen people that get all upset about a little crippled bird or a mangy dog or a half-starved kitten. I've seen Lakeland walking down the sidewalk, and there'd be a worm on the sidewalk. And she'd pick it down and pick it up and move it off the sidewalk so it didn't die. So, they can be tender-hearted toward even their animals. We too as adults need to be moved by infirmities and misfortunes of other people, of fellow beings. I saw a post on Facebook, and this one lady, she looked to be poor, and she had a bunch of kids. Their kids were very well behaved, but they were dressed and kind of dirty and all that. And she went through the line, and the total bill came to be more money than what she had. And so she started, giving it back to the lady to let her take it off. And another lady stepped up and said, "You don't have to do that. I've got this." And she paid for her whole bill because it touched her. And I thought, wow, how great of an example to show sympathy for someone that's less fortunate as us. One of the most expressive scriptures on this is Romans 12:13. Rejoice with them that rejoice, and weep with those that weep. Sometimes, we look at it like, be envious of those that move up and kick them when they're down and tell them to get back up and get moving, So we need to rejoice with those that rejoice and weep with those that weep. That's the Christian spirit. It'll save us from being envious, jealousy, hard-heartedness, and hard-heartedness, which is the root of many other sins. Life could be so much sweeter if everyone would be concerned about his fellow man. Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 32 says, "Be kind to one another, tender-hearted." That's when we start taking our eyes off of ourselves and think of how fellow man is doing and how we could help them. Even in times like we're in right now, people that don't have God, who are they going to turn to? So, if we're out there, then we need to be saying, hey, there's a better way. You don't trust in yourself. Don't trust in your job or the government. You need to be trusting in God. So, we can do our part even amongst this. The next trait is forgiveness. You can see the little ones, and they fuss and they'll fight, and next thing you know, they go right back to playing together in minutes. They're so genuine and sincere, and they're showing of forgiveness, and they don't hold grudges. They don't play the hypocrite of pretending to forgive, while all the time they're secretly planning their revenge. No good has ever come from revenge. Vengeance is mine, says God. When God forgives, He forgets. And I think we don't think of that often. If we keep praying for the same thing, God forgive me for this sin that I did many years ago, He's already forgiven you. It's out of His mind. And we need to be like that. If somebody genuinely repents and asks for forgiveness, it needs to be out of our mind. I don't even know what you're talking about. It's gone. That's one of the marks of true forgiveness, is when we forgive even as Christ forgave us, forbearing our patience toward one another and forgiving one another. If any man has a quarrel against any, even as Christ forgave you, so do you. Colossians 3 and 13. We don't have no right to ask God to forgive us while we're unwilling to practice forgiveness toward others. That's just fair. If we want God to forgive us, we have to be the same way toward our fellow man. Not pulling out your little black book. Let's see, Troy, last week you didn't even speak to me. So that's why I didn't speak to you today, trying to, it just doesn't need to be that way.
He didn't speak to me.
Uh-oh, Troy, I brought up something bad.
I'm just kidding.
When you're thinking about the child childish things that we should put away. Now that we have become men and women, and a greater reason we have been born again, we should consider it daily to get rid of and keep free from all undesirable traits of immaturity. The first step, and I think probably is the hardest, is to take a full self-evaluation and realize what problems that we have. Not that we're going to do so, but could you say right now, well, my problem is this? Do you recognize the problems that you have in your life? If you're not, then maybe you need to self-evaluate, because we all have problems. And if we know what our problems are, then we know what we need to work on. It's not easy, but it's necessary. Knowing your weakness can help you. The next thing that undesirable trait is tattling. Children tattle all the time. My goodness, I've had 3 of them, and they're all good kids. She did this. Well, oh man, I wanted to go in the room and lock the door and say, good luck. I'm taking a time out. I've been bad. But, people that gossip, they think that it'll make them stand in good with the person to whom they're talking about, not being mature enough to understand what it may do to someone else. Not all or even anyone is just like the other person. We're all totally different. And we need to learn to deal with misunderstandings and issues that arise by communication with the person that we have the problem with, and not try to gain everybody else to be on the side of our issue. And that's what happens often. I got a problem with such and such. Well, let me go over here and see if I can get Rick on my side. Rick, let me tell you what he did to me. If you got a problem with anybody, that's who you need to go to. You need to go solve that problem with that person. And don't go off and talking and trying to damage their reputation so you can feel better, and because you can get people on your side. God wants us to all grow to spiritual maturity. Leviticus 19:6, thou shalt not go up and down as a talebearer among thy people. 1 Timothy chapter 5 and verse 13. And with all thy learn to be idle and wander about from house to house, and not only idle, but tattlers, also busybodies, speaking things which they ought not to. Well, first of all, the way to stop all that is get busy. Go to work. Busy people don't have time for such silliness. If you're so involved in the Lord's work, you're not even going to know about what's going on over here or over here, because you're focused on what you got to do and get it handled. And if it doesn't involve you, stay out of it. If somebody even comes up and tries to tell you, whoa, I don't want to hear that. You need to go talk to them. Don't sit there and listen to people's gossip and talking about other people. If it doesn't concern you, stay out of it. You don't need to get involved with it. Vainglory. Children seek attention, and children need to be loved, but too much attention can warp their personality. Have you ever seen a child that's never done anything wrong? Mom and dad always coddled them. That's not your fault, baby. Don't worry about that. And then what happens when they grow up? The same thing. I didn't do nothing wrong. It's their fault. We got one in our family. She never did anything wrong. Never did anything wrong. Not in my immediate family. I don't want you to think it's one of my kids or whatever. But and she's passed that. She passes it on to the next generation. And so then, she breaks the law, she gets in trouble, and then she starts, those bad old cops. What? Were they not doing their job? So you broke the law. So who's wrong? The cops or you, you know? So, I mean, it's just, that's the way it happens. And so, you know, I'm not saying that we need to go out and point out our little children's fault, but when they do, we need to explain to them, everybody makes mistakes. That's all right. You made a mistake. Not, oh, it's all right, you didn't do anything wrong. You know, we can help form their personality and their traits for a long time. Some adults are too much obsessed with the desire for special attention. Some people, if they don't get credit, they're mad. Who are we trying to please? Are we trying to please man and let everybody know what we did, or are we trying to please God? You know, it doesn't matter who gets the credit for it, as long as the good work is being done. If all we are is credit seekers, you come see me. Anything that I do, I'll say, hey, such and such did that. I mean, it's not about that. It's about serving God and not who gets the credit. They think the whole world revolves about them, and you better be one of the spokes in their wheel or else. In Galatians chapter 5 and verse 26, it says, let us not be desirous of vain glory, provoking one another, envying one another. And 1 Peter verse 5 and verse 6 says, humble yourself under the mighty hand of God. Pride, brothers and sisters, is one of the greatest sins that we have in the church. You know, if we got to worry about our ego and worry about getting our ego stroked, then we need to stop and evaluate ourselves and try to do something different. Adults may be envious of another's successful business, their clothes, their looks. Envy among adults is an internal rotten condition. In Proverbs chapter 14 and verse 30, it says, but envy is the rottenness of the bones. Envy was a major problem of the Pharisees. I hope you don't mind, Mike, if I use you as an example, you and Patsy. Mike's got a good business. And, you know, you might sit back and go, oh, yeah, he's got it made. But you don't know the hours, the money that he's had to put into it and spend to build that business and manage that business. All we see is just, oh, Mike's doing good. You know, he's got a brand new truck, a nice house. Well, get out there and go to work, right? I mean, you know, he'd probably sell it to you today. Huh? Go see him. If it's that easy and you want to make all that money, he'll sell it to you. You don't even have to worry about that. But, you know, we can't sit back and look at other people's things that they got and be envious of that. Instability. Children are very changeable. You know, you can put a child to work, but it's hard to keep them at it. You know, you give them a job, and I try to train my grandkids, you know, have chores. Did you do your chores? No, I didn't. Why didn't you? I forgot. You know, get out there and do it. So, you know, if you can train them, it's hard to keep them, you know, on task, so, because they'll wander off, and next thing you know, they're out chasing butterflies or whatever. But if he finds a job and it's too difficult, he won't finish it. We should realize that it's not always easy to stick with difficult responsibilities, but it's one of the tests of maturity. And you think about that. I mean, every task that has to be done in this church needs to be done by somebody. And often, you know, they go undone. Somebody's got to pick up the slack. Successful living demands steadfastness. The wishy-washy and fickle person can never meet the demands of God's ministry for life in either physical or the spiritual realm. You know, we got to be in or we got to be out. We're either for God or we're not for God. Stick with it. Get the job done. You know, there's no backup plan to sharing the gospel. If it don't work from us spreading it, Oscar said the other day, he may not use the American people, but he's going to use somebody. You know, that's his means of spreading the gospel. So there is no backup plan. Depends on you and I. Proverbs chapter 6 and verse 19. One of the hateful and admonishable things in the sight of God is to sow discord amongst the brethren. That's a horrible thing, brethren. If we're going around and trying to talk about this and talk about that and talk about what the elders have done and talk about what the elders haven't done, I'm going to tell you something. This decision right here on whether to meet on Sunday morning and Sunday night and Wednesday night, not everybody's going to be happy with that decision. But you know what? If we had canceled it and said we're going to cancel services, everybody wouldn't be happy. So all you can do is do the very best you can. And if you don't like those decisions, then grow up to be an elder. Do the right thing and train to be elder. Then you can make the decisions. And then you can find out what it's all about. We need to be a peacemaker. We need to learn sometimes just to be still and know that God is God. You know, it doesn't matter. We don't need to be so in discord. We just need to be a peacemaker. Discourtesy. Rudeness is a characteristic of children. In fact, children can be downright cruel. And you've seen probably many cases of that. Little Nala the other day, my aunt came over to visit us and she cooked some food for us, and I was like, man, this is spot on. Thank you for doing that. And introducing little Nala to her, and she said, "You've got a big head." And I went, "Oh my goodness." I was like, "Oh, I'm sorry." She said, "She didn't mean anything bad by it." I said, "Well, I'm glad you saw it that way. Thank you." But I was just like, my heart stopped, and I was like, oh. And so then I pulled her to the side. I said, you don't say things like that to people. Just because you think it don't mean you can say it. But they can be so cruel, you know. And you've seen it, you know, with kids that come home and after they tell you what somebody else has done to them or said to them. But some adults live in the same state of immaturity in the body, but immature in emotions and spiritually. They get a perverted satisfaction out of criticizing, seeking fault in others. They get joy from inflicting wounds instead of building people up. Don't waste your time trying to tear people down. Spend your time encouraging one another, lifting one another up. If you want to be happy and you want Troy to speak to you, encourage him. I guarantee he'll speak to you. But if you go up to him and say, well, you went 5 minutes over today, brother, I don't like that, he might not speak to you next week. But we need to encourage one another. You know, nobody likes to every time you go, here you go, what did I do wrong this time? Here we go. Yeah, hey, oh, I did. I'm sorry. You know, spend your time building people up. Love will not permit us on this unkind course of action. 1 Corinthians chapter 13 and verse 4, it says, love is patient, love is kind, quick to forgive, and it rejoices in truth. That's what we're supposed to have. We're supposed to have that kind of love for our brethren and for, you know, even mankind. It's hard for people to love others when they don't love themselves. Nothing costs so little and is so priceless as courtesy. We don't have to have the last word. Have you ever met that person? Whatever you say, they're going to say something else, and then so if you say something back, then they're going to say something else, and then you know they got to have the last word. They got to be heard. They got to make sure you understand. You know, people have different opinions, and discourtesy says we have to be heard. We have to be understood many times. No one is always right. ask, could I really be wrong? Am I trying to force my opinion on somebody else? Remember, everybody's got their own opinions. Next week, we're going to study about the problem of worry. Let's